For years, The View has been more than just a talk show. It's been a cultural institution, bold, unfiltered, and untouchable. With millions of daily viewers and a panel of outspoken women, it claimed to represent the voice of the people. But what happens when that voice stops speaking truth and starts punching down? It began on a quiet Tuesday morning. During a segment about political theater, the hosts turned their sights on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't there to defend herself. She hadn't even been invited. Yet, the tone turned sharp, the laughter too loud, and then, the moment that would come back to haunt them. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, adjusted her glasses, and said, "She should be grateful we gave her a seat at this table." The audience chuckled. The co-hosts smirked. But across the country, thousands of viewers, especially black women, didn't laugh. They paused. They stiffened. Because they knew that wasn't a joke. That was a message. And Jasmine Crockett heard it loud and clear. The audience in the studio laughed. Online, some joined in. A few viral clips even added laughing emojis and snarky captions. "Jasmine can't take a joke," they said. "Another sensitive politician." But not everyone laughed. Some viewers paused. There was a strange discomfort in the air. The kind of tension you feel when something isn't right, but no one wants to admit it. On Black Twitter, the reaction was swift and furious. "How dare they say that on national TV?" one user wrote. Another replied, "She didn't even speak." And still they tried to erase her. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. No tweets, no interviews, no rage-filled press conferences, just silence. But that silence wasn't weakness. It was warning. And what the world didn't realize was that Jasmine wasn't retreating. She was preparing. Why didn't Jasmine Crockett fight back immediately? Why didn't she post a video, call a press conference, or fire off a single tweet? Because Jasmine understood something most people miss. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. Behind the quiet, she was gathering. Behind the calm, she was documenting. And behind that poised, steady silence, she was sharpening something far more dangerous than a comeback: evidence. Because when you humiliate a black woman on national television and she doesn't flinch, you should start to worry. Because Jasmine's silence wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the end. While the nation debated whether the jokes were just satire or something more sinister, Jasmine Crockett and her legal team said nothing. But behind closed doors, they were moving. Silently, deliberately, relentlessly. Clip by clip, they dissected the broadcast. Every smirk, every word, every pause between the insults. Nothing was overlooked. A team of legal analysts and digital technicians began building what they called the timeline of violation. They weren't just collecting footage. They were gathering evidence of intent. Then came the leak. An internal email, time-stamped and marked urgent, surfaced from inside ABC. It was short, director, and damning. Under no circumstances should Ms. Crockett be mentioned on air until legal review is completed. It had been sent to the producers. It had been read. It had been acknowledged. And then, it had been ignored. That wasn't just carelessness. That was reckless defiance. And for Jasmine Crockett's team, that was gold. The moment the internal email leaked, ABC spiraled. Panic mode, no time to spin, no space to hide. Senior executives locked themselves behind closed doors. Emergency meetings stacked on top of each other. 3-hour legal calls turned into 6-hour crisis sessions. The top floor of ABC headquarters in Manhattan, usually calm, confident, untouchable, was now a war zone. One executive was overheard muttering, "This isn't just bad PR. This is exposure." Legal exposure. In the studio, people weren't talking about ratings anymore. They were whispering about contracts, liability, termination clauses. A junior producer in tears an assistant director searching old emails to cover themselves, a host's stylist quietly packing up their client's wardrobe. It wasn't just fear, it was collapse. Then the real hit came. A major sponsor pulled out. A global auto brand, gone. Their statement was brief. We do not align our brand with platforms currently involved in defamation litigation. Within the next 6 hours, 2 more pulled out. Pharmaceutical. Technology. 7 figures in sponsorships, gone overnight. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett still hadn't said a word. What the world witnessed was public hostility, disguised as humor. A woman ridiculed, alone, mocked by 3 hosts in designer suits, on a stage backed by corporate dollars, broadcast to millions. And she said nothing. No tears, no fire. Just that deadly calm. But silence is rarely empty. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes silence is power. And sometimes silence is the sound before the hammer drops. So ask yourself, when someone is mocked in front of millions and they still don't flinch, are they afraid or are they about to strike? When Jasmine Crockett's legal team walked into the federal courthouse, they weren't carrying slogans. They weren't chasing headlines. They carried a war plan, a legal dossier, 137 pages thick, not a stack of papers, a loaded weapon, disguised in ink and evidence, page after page, time-stamped video footage, hot mic audio, internal emails, memos marked "Do not discuss on air." Every file was numbered. Every clip was cataloged. Every phrase cross-referenced and time-coded. This wasn't an argument. It was a calculated assault. Each piece of evidence wasn't just proof. It was position. It was precision. It was a message. You mocked the law, now meet it face to face. And then came the moment. The courtroom dimmed. The projector screen lit up. And Jasmine's lead attorney pressed play. What followed was not a news clip, not a soundbite, not a headline. It was a raw, unedited recording, captured off air. Never meant to be heard, never meant to exist. The voice familiar, unmistakable. Whoopi Goldberg. And in that voice, laced with arrogance and finality, she said, "Let it blow." We spin better than that little girl ever could. 10 words. That's all it took. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the judge leaned back, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was intent. Captured, preserved, played back in a courtroom where truth has no escape. And for the first time in that trial, the view went completely silent. At first, people felt sympathy. Jasmine was calm, alone, targeted by a media machine, with millions of viewers and unchecked power. Then came the off-air recording, and something inside the public snapped. What started as sympathy turned into outrage. She was never supposed to win. They thought she'd stay quiet and disappear. They knew what they were doing, and they didn't care. The arrogance, the entitlement, the smirk behind the microphone, thinking no one was listening. But Jasmine listened, and now, so did everyone else. People across the country weren't just upset, they were stunned. "I can't believe they were that arrogant," became the most repeated sentence across social media platforms that night. This was no longer about politics. It was about decency, power, consequences. Outside the courthouse, chaos. Reporters elbowed for position. Camera crews tripped over power cords. Satellite vans lined the streets. Microphones were shoved into every angle. Flashbulbs never stopped. This wasn't just a trial. This was television's reckoning. And the world wanted front row seats. Every major network was live. Anchors outside in winter coats, their voices urgent. We're standing here outside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., where history is unfolding in real time. But inside, no shouting, no chaos, no viral theatrics, just rows of cold benches, stacks of documented evidence, and the one thing that mattered most, the law. The View's defense team stepped forward, confident, rehearsed, polished. Their strategy? Satire. They claimed it was just commentary, that the show was opinion-based, and that Jasmine Crockett, as a public figure, was fair game. One of their lawyers even smirked as he said, "The First Amendment protects provocative speech. This is America." But Jasmine's lead attorney didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He just opened a folder, stepped forward, and read from precedent. His voice was calm, but cutting. It's not opinion when you knowingly attack, while under legal notice. The courtroom went still. He flipped the page. It's not satire when you ignore documented warnings and mock someone mid-litigation. He flipped again. And it's not protected speech when the intention is humiliation, not commentary. And suddenly, the View's defense didn't sound like rights. It sounded like excuses. And then came the voice that didn't belong to either side. A witness, called not to testify about facts, but about meaning. Dr. Marcus Lee, professor of media ethics, stood up from the witness chair. No theatrics, no microphone flair. Just truth, spoken with the weight of years behind it. He looked directly at the jury and said, "If we let this pass, we are saying defamation is entertainment." Silence, real silence, not fear, not confusion, reflection, because in that moment, this wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett. It was about all of us. What kind of country excuses humiliation just because it was filmed? What kind of democracy defends cruelty if it draws ratings? And suddenly, the trial wasn't just legal. It became moral. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. No confusion, no hesitation. They returned with one word: guilty. The View had crossed the line. The verdict? $1 million in damages for defamation and retaliatory misconduct. A court-ordered public apology to be aired in prime time. And most shocking of all, the immediate termination of all 3 central hosts: Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin. The courtroom gasped. Whoopi stared ahead, expressionless. Joy lowered her eyes. Sunny exhaled, slowly, as if realizing a line had been crossed that she could never step back from. The show that once ruled daytime TV, now just another legal cautionary tale. Inside ABC headquarters, panic became paralysis. Emails flew, contracts reviewed, advertisers demanded explanations. Then came the leak. A message from a senior executive sent internally hours after the verdict. We weren't beaten by a lawsuit. We bled out from arrogance. The message hit harder than the verdict itself. ABC knew this wasn't about losing in court. It was about how they'd ignored every warning, mocked a sitting congresswoman, and doubled down until the damage was irreversible. Other networks took notice. Within 24 hours, at least 6 major broadcasters issued internal memos, effective immediately. No on-air jokes or commentary about any individual involved in active litigation. The message was clear. If you humiliate the wrong person on camera now, you might be next. Across the country, millions watched the verdict unfold. At first, cheers, justice, relief, vindication, but then something deeper, a quiet realization. How many people have been mocked on national TV, but never had the chance to fight back like Jasmine did? For years, we laughed at the punchlines. We shared the clips. We hit like on the humiliation. But now, we started to feel something else. Shame. Because Jasmine didn't just win. She held up a mirror to us all. In the days after the verdict, every major network reached out. Exclusive interviews, magazine covers, podcast deals, book advances. Jasmine Crockett said no to all of it. No cameras, no applause, no grand speeches. She simply posted one sentence on her social media account. The truth is loud enough on its own. Just 8 words. But they echoed across the country like a rallying cry. The sentence appeared on protest signs, on t-shirts, on digital billboards across Times Square. It became more than a quote. It became a movement. What Jasmine didn't say spoke volumes. Across the broadcast industry, silence was no longer golden. It was terrifying. Newsrooms instituted Crockett protocols. Executives created pre-air legal teams. Hosts were warned, if you can't prove it, don't say it. And a new term swept through control rooms and edit bays, Crockett bait. It meant a seemingly harmless comment that could get your network sued. Behind the cameras, no one was laughing anymore. Jasmine Crockett's case didn't end in court. It entered the classroom. Law schools across America revised their syllabi. One new case now sat beside New York Times versus Sullivan, Crockett v. The View professors debated her strategy. Law students memorized her team's filings. Legal journals called it the most significant free speech case of the decade. And across the country, firms hosted panels and summits. Satire versus smear, lessons from Crockett. Because the courtroom wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new standard in American media. No one expected it. Not from the girl they mocked. Not from the woman they tried to silence. Not from the voice that stayed quiet while the world laughed. But Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond. She rewrote the rules. She didn't tear down the empire with rage. She dismantled it with evidence, discipline, and a silence so sharp it became its own kind of scream. The very people who once smirked at her now studied her, feared her, quoted her. And what began as humiliation ended as a historic shift in how America sees justice, speech, and dignity, not through outrage, but through the relentless power of truth. No podium, no chance, no roaring crowd. Just one woman walking down the steps of a federal courthouse. No smile, no wave, only gravity and truth. Jasmine Crockett descended slowly, her heels echoing off the concrete. Cameras flashed, journalists shouted, but she didn't stop. And then, just before she reached the street, she turned her head slightly, looked into the sea of lenses, and said, "When words are sharp enough, they cut like actions, and should cost just as much." Then she walked away. That image, backlit by the morning sun. No entourage, no celebration. Just a woman, armed with truth, leaving behind a broken empire and a new standard carved in stone. This was never a story about victory. It was never about ratings, revenge, or even punishment. It was a story about boundaries, the boundaries of power, the limits of arrogance, and the invisible line between commentary and cruelty. But most of all, it was a story about truth. Not just any truth, but a truth that was prepared, documented, and patient enough to wait for its moment. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak often, but when she did, she reminded a nation that silence is not weakness. It can be a weapon. And when wielded with care, it rewrites everything. Sometimes the loudest power isn't found in shouting, but in knowing the truth, holding it close, and waiting for the moment the world is ready to hear it. In a world obsessed with noise, Jasmine Crockett taught us that silence, when paired with preparation, is not weakness. It's strategy. It's wisdom. It's justice on its own timeline. So the next time someone mocks you, underestimates you, or tells you your voice doesn't matter, remember this story. Because truth always returns. And when it does, it speaks louder than any insult ever could. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, empowered, or simply reminded you that truth still matters, subscribe now. Because this channel is where voices like Jasmine's are never silenced. And stories like this one, we tell them every single week. Let's protect truth. Let's honor dignity. Let's rewrite the rules together.